They said I had already signed the papers. That was the exact phrase the man at the bank used, looking at me with that patient tone people reserve for the very old or the very confused. Yes, Mrs. Ames, the withdrawal form was processed yesterday. Your signature is here, see? And he turned the screen toward me, smiling like he was doing me a favor. But that wasn't my signature. It looked like mine, sure. The same loops, the same long tail M. But it wasn't mine. I hadn't signed a single thing in weeks. I didn't panic. At my age, panic is wasted energy. I just nodded and asked for a printed copy. The man hesitated, but printed it. I took the paper, folded it into my purse, and thanked him. On the way out, I walked slower than usual, not because my knees were acting up, but because my brain was running 100 miles an hour. Someone had forged my signature, and not for something small. It was a withdrawal of $42,000 from my retirement account. The breeze outside was still warm from the last breath of summer, but I didn't feel it. I walked to my car, the same gray sedan I'd driven since my husband passed, and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. My hands rested on the steering wheel for a long time. Jeremy. It had to be Jeremy. Or his wife. The only two people who even knew I had that account, much less how to access it. I drove home on autopilot, passing the gas station, the pharmacy, the church, with its crooked sign that always made me smile. But not today. At home, I didn't take off my coat. I walked straight to the file cabinet in the back bedroom, the one no one ever goes into unless I ask. I opened the second drawer, the one labeled Finance in my careful handwriting, and pulled out the folder marked POA Jeremy Ames. Power of attorney. I'd signed it 3 years ago after my hip surgery, just in case. He'd insisted, said it was better to be prepared. I sat at the dining table, opened the folder, and began comparing. My real signature. The one I'd signed in front of a notary, the one on file with the bank, then the one from yesterday's transaction. I took out a magnifying glass and looked closer. The loops were too clean. The pen pressure was off. And there was a hesitation mark on the capital M. People who forge signatures always hesitate where the original never did. I placed the two signatures side by side and stared. No doubt. Someone had tried to become me, at least on paper. I didn't cry. That's something people expect, I think. For old women to sit alone in their kitchens and cry when something like this happens. But I've been through worse. I buried a child. I survived breast cancer. I lived through my husband's long, slow decline, feeding him applesauce and wiping his chin when he could no longer lift his hands. Compared to that, this was insult, yes, but not defeat. Still, it stung. $42,000 wasn't my whole savings, but it wasn't pocket change either. I had worked for that money. Saved it during the lean years, when we skipped vacations and fixed things ourselves. When Jeremy was little and needed braces, we delayed buying a new furnace. When my husband lost his job in '91, we lived on beans and hope. That money was never free. It came with sacrifice stitched into every dollar. I opened my notebook and wrote down what I knew. Date of transaction. Amount. Claimed signature. Timestamp. Everything I could remember from the screen at the bank. I wrote like I was back in my bookkeeper days. Sharp. Precise. Deliberate. Then I made tea. I always make tea when something big happens. Good news or bad, I need the ritual of boiling water, the weight of the mug in my hand, the quiet between sips. It anchors me. As I drank, I looked at the photo on the mantel. Me and Howard on our 50th anniversary. He in that blue tie I loved. me in the green dress with shoulder pads. We looked tired, but content. He would have been livid to see this, not because of the money, but because someone had treated me like I was disposable. "You don't let people walk on you, Mags," he used to say, "even if they're family, especially then." He was right. I took out my phone and dialed Jeremy's number. It rang 4 times before voicemail picked up. I didn't leave a message. I didn't want explanations. I wanted answers. Honest, unfiltered answers. But I knew I wouldn't get them from him. Not yet. So I called someone else instead. "Cynthia," I said when the line picked up, "do you still know that notary down at the courthouse?" Cynthia paused. "Sure do. Why?" I looked again at the printed signature in front of me. Still steady, still calm. "I think someone just committed fraud in my name," I said. "And I'm going to prove it." The worst thing about betrayal at this age isn't the shock. It's the familiarity. You stop being surprised that people take what they want and leave you with silence. You just start to wonder when exactly they decided you didn't count anymore. I spent the rest of that day going through every drawer, every envelope, every file. The papers were neatly labeled. Howard and I had always been meticulous. But I still checked them twice. Property deeds, insurance documents, investment accounts, my living will, and the folder that made my stomach twist. The power of attorney I'd signed over to Jeremy. I had kept a notarized copy, thank God, and as I held it in my hand now, I remembered everything about that day. The hospital smell, the sharp light above the desk, the way Jeremy held my coat for me and said, "It's just precaution, Mom. You don't have to worry. I'll only use it if there's ever an emergency." Funny thing about emergencies, they always seem to benefit the person declaring them. I set that folder aside and turned to my account statements, printed them from the bank's online portal. 3 months' worth. Page after page of normal things, utility bills, grocery trips, the payment for my dental work. But then I saw it. The $42,000 listed under authorized disbursement via POA. Not withdrawal, not transfer, not even check. Authorized disbursement. Which meant the bank had processed it under Jeremy's legal right to act on my behalf. I had to stop and breathe. Somewhere between the grief and the anger was a deep, aching humiliation. I'd given him that access. I'd signed the form. I'd trusted him. That's what no one tells you about legal documents. The ink may be dry, but the damage is always wet and spreading. The next morning, I called Cynthia again. "That notary friend of yours," I said, "can she meet today?" By noon, I was sitting in the tiny office of a woman named Ruth Delgado. Gray curls pinned back, cardigan neat, fingers with rings that looked like they carried decades of stories. I liked her instantly. "I need someone to compare these," I told her, laying the 2 signatures side by side. Mine from the original POA and the one on the bank document. She looked closely, pulled out a glass, adjusted her lamp. "They wanted it to look like yours," she said finally. "But it isn't. Not in pen pressure, not in stroke order, and not in baseline alignment." "Could you put that in writing?" I asked. She looked up at me, reading the question behind the question. "Planning to do something about this, Mrs. Ames?" I nodded. "Good," she said. "Because if someone forged this, it's not just a family matter. It's a felony." That word hit me harder than I expected. Felony. Not mistake, not misunderstanding. A crime. Against me. When I got home, I didn't sit down. I walked into the kitchen, took out the envelope of cash I kept for emergencies, and counted out $200. Then I called the law office of Walter B. Hanley, the same man who handled Howard's estate when he died. They squeezed me in for 4:30. The office hadn't changed. Same paneled walls, same carpet that looked like it belonged in a motel. Walter had aged. His mustache was whiter now, and his belly more pronounced. But his eyes were sharp. "I need advice," I said, "and possibly a lawsuit." He raised a brow. "Tell me everything." I told him. Slowly, carefully. Showed him the documents. Let him read the bank printout, the notary's statement, the POA. He didn't interrupt, but by the end, his jaw was tight. "You understand what this means, Margaret?" "I do. This is theft, abuse of power of attorney. If we prove he forged your signature, it becomes criminal fraud. We're not talking about a misunderstanding here. We're talking about charges, possibly jail time." I looked him in the eye. "I want to freeze the remaining accounts before they touch another dollar." He nodded. "We can petition for an emergency hold, but we'll need to move fast." "I'm ready," I said. He started drafting papers immediately. I sat in the chair, purse on my lap, watching him type. "I'll have to notify your son," he said eventually. "He'll be served." "That's fine. And you're prepared for what that means?" I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "Do you know how many hours I spent with that boy when he had croup? Holding him upright so he could breathe? You don't forget something like that." But apparently, he did. Walter looked at me and softened. "You're doing the right thing, Margaret." I didn't respond. Because right didn't feel triumphant. It felt necessary. That night, I changed the locks. I had never changed locks before. In all my years in this house, it was always Howard who handled things like that. He'd tinker with the hinges, oil the deadbolts, curse under his breath when the screws didn't line up. I used to bring him lemonade while he worked. He'd wipe his forehead and wink like he was still 20. But now it was just me and the locksmith, a quiet young man who called me ma'am and never once asked why I wanted all new hardware. I stood by while he drilled out the old cylinder, the metal shavings falling onto the welcome mat I'd bought back in 1984. It said, "Home Sweet Home." I almost laughed at how bitter that sounded now. When he left, I stood in the hallway, key in hand, and tested the lock myself. Turned once, then twice. Solid. I'd been careful not to mention the change to anyone, not even my neighbor Lucille. Not because I didn't trust her. Lucille had brought me soup through 2 winters and a flu. But because something inside me had shifted. When you find out your own child has violated your trust, the lines around you harden. You stop sharing out of habit. You hold your own name closer. I made myself a simple dinner. Toast. Eggs. A few slices of apple. The kind of meal that doesn't require appetite, just routine. I ate at the table, listening to the creaks of the old house as night settled in. The place felt heavier somehow, like even the walls were waiting to see what I'd do next. Afterward, I went into the den and opened the old cedar chest I hadn't touched in years. Inside were keepsakes, Howard's service medals, my mother's lace handkerchief, photos of Jeremy as a boy. I found the school report where he got all A's in 5th grade. I remember the way he beamed when I pinned it to the fridge. He used to run into my arms after school, used to cry when he scraped his knees, used to say I was the best mom in the world. Now I was just an obstacle between him and what he thought he deserved. The next morning, I went to visit Beverly. She's been my friend since the 1970s, when our boys were in Scouts together and we used to bake cookies for the same fundraisers. We'd grown older in different ways. She'd gone churchy, I'd gone quiet. But we still saw each other once or twice a month. She lived in a small brick duplex with a patio full of petunias and wind chimes that made real music, not the tinny kind. "Come in," she said when I rang. "You look like you've seen something, Maggie." I didn't answer until we were seated, 2 mugs of coffee between us. Then I pulled the paper from my purse, the forged signature, and set it on the table. Beverly frowned. "That's not yours." "I know." She leaned closer. "You think Jeremy did this?" "I don't think. I know, and I'm taking him to court." Her eyebrows shot up. God Almighty. We sat in silence for a while. She didn't ask questions, just let me talk. I told her everything, the bank visit, the notary, the lawyer. Her eyes didn't leave mine. "Well," she said finally, "it's about damn time someone held these adult children accountable. You've done more for him than most mothers ever could." "I just didn't expect it to come to this," I admitted. "No one ever does." She reached for my hand and gave it a squeeze. Hers was cold, bony, but firm. Later, she brought out a folder from her own kitchen drawer. "You want to see something?" she said. I made copies of my bank authorizations and signed every one in red ink. Told my boys, if it's not in red, it's not me. I smiled. Smart. No, just burned once. My nephew took out a loan in my sister's name 10 years ago. People think they won't do it, but they will, especially when they think you're soft. I nodded, letting the truth of it sink in. When I got home, the answering machine was blinking. I still have a landline. The voice was Jeremy's. "Hey, Mom, I got a call from some lawyer, Walter something, said it was urgent. Can you give me a call? I don't really understand what this is about." I didn't pick up. I didn't call back. That night I went over Walter's email. He'd attached the motion to freeze the accounts and the preliminary complaint draft. It was all there in plain English. Fraudulent use of power of attorney, misappropriation of funds, breach of fiduciary duty. I added one more thing to my notebook, the date and time of Jeremy's call. I wanted it on record that he hadn't denied anything, just played dumb. It wasn't a surprise. He'd always hated confrontation. When he was 14, he broke the neighbor's window with a baseball and swore it wasn't him, until Howard made him march over and apologize. He was good at avoiding blame, better at telling people what they wanted to hear. But I didn't want to hear anything anymore. I wanted action. Consequences. That night, I slept with the hallway light on. Not because I was scared, but because I needed to remember that this house was still mine. And the light inside it was mine too. I don't know exactly when it changed. That's the thing. You never notice the moment your child stops looking at you like you're the sun and starts looking at you like you're in the way. It happens quietly, under the surface. Like a leak under a floorboard you don't see until the wood starts to rot. Jeremy was a good boy. Truly. Polite. Bright. Never gave me or Howard any real trouble growing up. He had a soft heart when he was young, used to bring home stray cats, tried to grow tomatoes in a styrofoam cup when he was 7. I remember him crying when one of them wilted, asking me if it died because he wasn't good enough. That's the part that gets me. How someone so gentle could harden like this. I blame her, partly. Candace, his wife. From the moment she came into his life, things shifted. Not at first. In the early days, she was sugary sweet, always calling me Mrs. Ames and bringing store-bought pie to Sunday lunch. But sweetness doesn't always mean sincerity. I saw the way she'd watch our furniture with quiet judgment, how her nose wrinkled when I offered second-hand napkins at Christmas. She thought she was subtle. She wasn't. They married quickly. A courthouse wedding, no fuss. I offered to host something, just a little dinner, but Candace said she didn't want all that pressure. Funny how people pretend simplicity is a choice when it's really just a way to exclude others. After the wedding, I started hearing things secondhand, through neighbors, or from their Christmas card, not from Jeremy himself. Then came the suggestions. Candace dropping hints about how big the house was for a woman my age, about how, in this market, it would make sense to sell and downsize, about how a smaller place would be easier for everyone. That was the year Howard passed, and my grief was still raw. I didn't want to be rude, so I smiled and changed the subject. But I remembered. The next year, Jeremy brought up power of attorney. "Just in case, Mom," he said, "so I can help if something happens, so we're not scrambling if you're in the hospital." I hesitated, but he said all the right things, that it was just a precaution, that I could revoke it any time, that it wouldn't be used unless necessary. And I believed him, because he was my son. The irony is, I never used to worry about money. Not because I had so much, we were never rich, but because we were careful. Howard and I planned everything. We didn't buy things we couldn't afford. We kept ledgers, receipts, spreadsheets. After he died, I stuck to the same habits. I knew exactly where every dollar was. Still do. So when Jeremy and Candace started suggesting investments, new models, crypto startups, friend of a friend's business venture, I always said no. Politely, but firmly. I could see the disappointment in Jeremy's face each time. He'd mask it quickly, shift the conversation, but it was there. A quiet resentment building under the surface. They stopped visiting after that. Oh, we'd talk on birthdays, holidays. I'd get a card on Mother's Day, a call on Thanksgiving. But not the kind of visit that fills your house with laughter and mess and muddy footprints from little ones. Not the kind that makes you feel like family. Just formalities. I used to set the table for them anyway, every once in a while. Roast a chicken, bake a pie. Hope they'd come by. They didn't. Eventually, I stopped. The last time Jeremy was in my house before all this, he stood in the kitchen doorway, looking around like he was taking inventory. He didn't comment on the new curtains or the hummingbird feeder I'd put up. He asked if I'd considered getting a medical alert system. I said I hadn't. "Just thinking about your safety," he said. I nodded, but I knew what he meant. He was circling the nest he thought was his by birthright. And now here we were. A forged signature, a missing $42,000, and a silence thicker than grief. I sat at the table with my tea and stared at the stack of documents Walter had given me. I'd signed the motion to freeze the accounts. He was filing it in the morning. The court date would come fast. Emergency motions move quickly, especially when financial abuse is involved. I'd asked him not to tell Jeremy yet, just long enough for me to breathe, to plan my next steps. Walter had agreed, though I could tell he was itching to get things moving. "You're entitled to press charges," he'd said. I wasn't sure yet. Not because I wanted to protect Jeremy, not anymore, but because I needed to understand what I wanted out of all this. Money back? Justice? Dignity? Maybe just to be seen again, as a woman, as a mother, as a person not to be crossed. The phone rang again that night. This time I let it ring until the machine picked up. "Mom, hey, just checking in. Candace says you've been quiet lately. Let me know if you need anything." Click. Quiet lately, as if I owed him noise. I got up and locked the front door, then double-checked the back. I wasn't scared. I was done being available. Walter's office smelled like old paper and coffee that had been sitting too long on the burner. There was something oddly comforting about it. The smell of decisions, of signatures, of things that couldn't be undone. He wore the same suit as last time, navy with a faint pinstripe, and his tie was a little crooked, the way Howard used to wear his when he didn't want to be there. Walter offered me the chair across from his desk and waited until I settled in before he spoke. "I've filed the motion to freeze all known accounts with your son's name attached. The bank's compliance department has already confirmed they'll cooperate pending the judge's approval." I nodded. "And the other thing?" "The complaint for fraud is ready. But I need to ask this again, Margaret. Are you sure you want to pursue this?" I looked at the papers laid out in front of me. My name typed in capital letters. The alleged act, forgery, unauthorized disbursement, abuse of power of attorney. "I'm sure," I said. "I just want to know how long it will take." He tapped his pen against his desk thoughtfully. "The hearing for the asset freeze will be within 10 days. If the judge agrees, we can keep everything locked down while we investigate further. If you want to take it to civil court for damages, that could take months. And if the DA chooses to prosecute, it becomes criminal." I looked out the window. The courthouse across the street was beige and flat, the kind of building people pass 1,000 times and never think about until they have to walk through its doors. I never thought I'd be one of them. "I'm not after revenge," I said. "I want it on record, that's all. I want someone official to say this happened, that it was wrong." Walter leaned back in his chair. "Most people your age would rather pretend it didn't happen. They say, 'It's family, let it go.' Most people didn't live through 1973 on canned beans and coupons," I said. "I didn't save my whole life just to have it taken with a fake signature." That made him smile, just briefly. We reviewed the documents line by line. I asked questions. He answered every one. I made notes in the margin. By the end of the hour, my head ached, but my spine felt a little straighter. As I stood to leave, Walter added, "Once your son is notified, it won't stay quiet. You'll need to be ready for calls, visits, pressure." I paused at the door. "Let him knock," I said. "He won't be getting in." Back home, I brewed a pot of tea and opened the front curtains for the first time in days. The street looked just as it always had. Mrs. Granger watering her petunias, the Simmons boy kicking a soccer ball against his garage. Normal things. Things untouched by betrayal. I sat with my tea and watched the light move across the rug. I wasn't thinking about the money anymore. I was thinking about the moment Jeremy gets that envelope, the legal notice, the realization that his mother wasn't as docile as he thought. Let him be surprised. Let him finally see me. He showed up the next day, unannounced. I heard the car before I saw it. That too smooth hum of his hybrid pulling up against the curb, the door shutting a little too hard. I didn't move from my chair at first. Let him wait. The knock came. Not frantic, not timid, just 3 sharp raps like he still believed he had the right to enter. I got up slowly, not because of my knees this time, but because I wanted him to know I wasn't rushing. I opened the door just enough to see him fully. Jeremy looked like he hadn't slept. Pale, the skin around his eyes a little bruised from stress. His hair was still gelled back, though, like he couldn't quite let go of appearances. "Mom," he said, his voice tight. "Can I come in?" I didn't move. "Why?" He blinked. "We need to talk." "I think we're past that." "Please," he added. "Just 10 minutes." I stepped aside, not out of softness, but because I wanted to hear what he had to say in full light under my roof. I wanted the house to witness this too. He walked into the living room, looked around like it might be his last time seeing it. Maybe it would. He didn't sit. I got a notice from a lawyer, he said. Walter Hanley? I nodded. He says you filed a motion, that you're accusing me of fraud. He spoke the word like it was toxic. I'm not accusing, I said calmly. I'm reporting. Mom, come on. You think I forged your signature? Why would I ever do that? That's a question for you to answer, not me. He rubbed his face, let out a long breath through his nose. Look, maybe there was some confusion with the bank. Maybe they used the POA the wrong way, or Candace misunderstood something when she spoke to them. You know how these institutions are. They don't explain anything. And Candace's cousin works there part-time. Maybe he thought he was helping. Maybe. Enough, I interrupted. Don't talk to me like I'm one of your clients. He froze. You used the POA without my knowledge, I continued. You moved money out of an account you had no business touching, and you signed my name, or someone did, on a form I never saw. That's not confusion, Jeremy. That's theft. He didn't deny it. That was the part I noticed most. He didn't say, I didn't do it. He just paced, adjusted his cuffs, avoided my eyes. I was going to replace it, he said eventually. I just needed it short term. The startup was about to get its first round of funding, and I didn't want to miss the window. I had every intention. You stole from me. I'm your son, he shouted. I've spent my whole life. You've spent your whole life knowing I would never say no. The words hung in the room like smoke. He turned away, breathing hard. I gave you every chance to do this right, I said more softly now. I helped you when you were out of work. I paid off the medical bills when Candace had that surgery. I helped with your mortgage when you said you were drowning. And never once did I make you beg. I gave. Freely. Because I loved you. He didn't speak. But that wasn't enough. You wanted more. You wanted control. He finally turned to face me. His eyes were glossy. You're blowing this out of proportion. I laughed once, quietly. Is that what you told yourself when you forged my name? That I'd be dead soon enough and no one would know the difference? Jesus, Mom. I'm not dead, Jeremy, and I'm not stupid. And I'm not afraid of court. He swallowed. You'd really take your own son to court? I met his gaze. You already took me there. He didn't argue after that. Just stood in the middle of the room for a moment, shoulders hunched, like a boy caught stealing candy from the store. Only this wasn't candy. This was my life. You can't undo this, he said finally, like it was some kind of warning. I don't want to undo it, I said. I want to finish it. When he left, he didn't slam the door. He didn't even look back. I stood at the window and watched him drive away. Then I picked up the envelope Walter had sent, the one with the affidavit I still had to sign. I took out my pen and signed it in steady, deliberate strokes, not just to make it legal, but to make it mine. The forensic document examiner's report came on a Thursday. I opened the envelope at the dining table, beside a fresh cup of tea I never touched. The report was 12 pages long, dense with comparisons, overlays, and technical language. But I only needed one sentence. In the examiner's professional opinion, the signature in question was not executed by Mrs. Margaret Ames. That was it. One line that drew the boundary clear. I wasn't imagining it. I hadn't confused dates or forgotten some long-ago conversation. Someone had imitated me, badly enough for an expert to say, "This isn't hers." I called Walter the moment I finished reading. "That's the nail," he said. "It's more than enough to support the fraud claim. We'll attach it to the complaint and send a copy to the judge." His voice was calm, but I could hear the satisfaction beneath it. I understood. People like Walter deal in proof. They can't operate on emotion, not even indignation. They need documents, signatures, stamps. And now we had one that mattered. "There's more," he said, his tone shifting. "The bank's compliance office finished their internal review. They've given us access to camera footage." I sat up straighter. "From the day of the transaction?" "Yes. And while I can't send you a copy, I've reviewed it myself. The footage shows a woman, not you, visiting the branch at 2:17 p.m. on the date in question. She presents an envelope, speaks briefly with a clerk, and signs a form at the counter. The clerk doesn't ask for ID. Apparently, they assumed familiarity, since the person said she was your representative under POA. Did you recognize her?" "I did," he said. "It was Candace." My breath caught. I don't know why. I already knew. But hearing it confirmed out loud, not guessed, not assumed, but confirmed, still bruised something inside me. "She wore sunglasses," Walter continued, "and a scarf over her hair, but the camera angle caught her face as she turned. We've asked the bank for a still frame to submit with the complaint." I stared at the blank wall across from me. I couldn't remember the last time Candace had looked me in the eye. Maybe the Christmas before last, when she brought over a pie and didn't take off her coat. She forged it herself? Appears so. The signature was done at the bank. The form was processed within 10 minutes of her arrival. And Jeremy? He's not in the footage. But that doesn't change liability. He holds the POA. He allowed access, or neglected to supervise it. We can argue conspiracy. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "What happens next?" I asked. "I file the amended complaint tomorrow. Then the judge rules on the freeze. After that, we decide if you want to pursue civil damages or refer it to the district attorney." There was a silence between us. "Mrs. Ames," he said carefully, "the DA won't hesitate to prosecute if you press it. This isn't minor. It's a felony. And if both parties were involved, they'll likely both face charges." I didn't answer. I just folded the report back into its envelope and stared at the soft edges of my cooling tea. That night, I didn't sleep. Not for worry. For clarity. I sat in my robe in the kitchen with the lights off, listening to the wind move through the hedges outside. I tried to remember the last real conversation I had with Candace. Maybe it was the day Jeremy brought her around for dinner the first time, all those years ago. She wore a blazer and laughed a little too hard at his stories. Howard had leaned over to me that night and whispered, "She's a climber." I'd hushed him. Thought he was being unkind. He wasn't. I pulled out my old photo albums and flipped to the pages from Jeremy's wedding. Candace smiling in a white dress, flanked by people I barely knew. Jeremy's hand on her waist. My smile wide but tight. I remember feeling like a guest in someone else's family that day. Now I knew why. By morning, I was ready. Not for court. For the truth to come all the way out. Let them try to explain that video. Let them try to explain that signature. Let them finally speak my name. Not because they needed something, but because they had to answer for what they did to me. The bank branch looked smaller than I remembered, maybe because I'd spent the last few weeks dealing with lawyers and documents that weighed more than this whole building, or maybe because places shrink when their trust has been broken. Walter had arranged the meeting quietly. No official letters, no subpoenas, just a conversation. The bank didn't want trouble, not yet. but they agreed to let me speak with the clerk who'd handled the transaction. Her name was Alyssa. Mid-30s, blonde ponytail, nervous hands. She greeted me in a small conference room off to the side, offered me water, then glanced nervously toward the glass door like someone might be watching. "I remember that day," she said, almost before I sat down. "Your son's wife came in. She said she was acting under your power of attorney. We'd seen her before a few times, so we didn't ask for ID." I didn't interrupt. I let her talk. She said it was urgent. Something about a business opportunity that required a fast transfer. She handed over a form, pre-filled but unsigned, and said she just needed to finalize it. Alyssa hesitated, then looked down. She signed at the counter. I watched her do it. I didn't realize she was pretending to be you." "Did she say she was Margaret Ames?" I asked. "She said, 'I'm here on behalf of Margaret Ames.' But then she signed your name. I didn't question it. I should have." She looked up then, eyes anxious. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean to help anyone do anything illegal." "You didn't know," I said. "But you're willing to say what you saw?" She nodded immediately. "Yes, I already told the internal investigator. They're documenting everything. I can give a statement if you need." Walter had told me this would help. A lot. Verbal confirmation, a timeline, a witness. It was the last piece we needed before submitting the final affidavit to the court. As I left the room, Alyssa stood and held the door. "We've implemented new protocols," she added quickly. "From now on, any POA must be verified through management before a transaction." I nodded. It wouldn't help me now, but maybe someone else's mother wouldn't have to sit in that same chair. Back in my car, I sat with the engine off, watching the bank's automatic doors open and close as people came and went. Most of them wouldn't think twice about what happened behind those glass panes. They'd never imagine a son letting his wife impersonate his mother to get at her money. But I could imagine it now. I could see it all. Candace in sunglasses. Her voice polite. Her signature practiced. And Jeremy. Waiting somewhere, phone in hand, watching the time, knowing she'd do it because he didn't have the nerve. It didn't feel like a betrayal anymore. It felt like a choice. Planned. Coordinated. Executed. That's when I drove straight to Walter's office and asked for the referral to the DA. "No more holding back," I told him. "I'm not just freezing accounts. I want them charged." He didn't flinch. He just opened a drawer and pulled out the forms. "You'll need to sign a declaration," he said, "under penalty of perjury." I took the pen without hesitation. "I've waited long enough," I said. "It's time someone else answered questions for a change." By the time I left, the paperwork was in motion. The statement was filed. The evidence submitted. The wheels of justice, slow as they may be, were now fully turning. That night, I walked into my bedroom, closed the door, and locked it. Not because I was scared, because for the first time in a long time, I felt entitled to my own peace. They had stolen my name. Now they were going to hear it in a courtroom. The summons came on a Monday, a plain white envelope with the county court seal stamped in blue. I opened it slowly, sitting at the kitchen table with the radio off and the clock ticking louder than usual. Inside, the official court date, the case number, the names, Margaret Ames versus Jeremy Ames, and Candace Ames. Seeing it in print was like swallowing a stone, cold, solid, undeniable. Walter called an hour later. "You ready for this?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at the envelope again. So formal, so clean. It felt strange that something so devastating could arrive without a sound. "I'm ready," I said. "We'll go over everything in advance. Exhibits, timeline, witness prep. You won't be alone." But I would be. Not in the courtroom. Walter would be there, the judge, a clerk, maybe a reporter if they cared to cover it. But in every other way, I'd be alone. No family on the benches behind me. No one waiting outside with coffee afterward. Just me and my name and what they tried to do to it. Over the next few days, we reviewed everything again. The forged signature report, Alyssa's statement, the bank video, the account activity logs. Walter laid them out like puzzle pieces on his long oak table. "Prosecutors love this kind of case," he said. "Clean, documented, and the victim is credible." That word, victim, still made something twist in my chest. I didn't like how it sounded. I wasn't broken. I was just changed. On Thursday, he scheduled a mock hearing, just me and him in his office, practicing how I'd answer questions. He asked gently, "Mrs. Ames, can you describe the moment you realized something was wrong?" "Yes," I said, steady. "The man at the bank told me I'd signed a form I'd never seen. I knew immediately it wasn't mine." "And how did that make you feel?" I paused. Not because I didn't know, but because I'd never said it out loud. "Like I didn't exist," I said quietly. Like someone had decided I was no longer real enough to ask for consent. Walter nodded. "Good. Keep that. Don't try to sound strong. Just sound like yourself." The irony was, I'd never felt stronger. Afterward, I went home and opened the drawer in the living room, the one with all the old receipts. I took out every check I'd written for Jeremy over the past 15 years and spread them out on the table. Down payment on their house. Private school tuition for their daughter. A car when his transmission died. Dental surgery for Candace. A vacation when they said they needed mental health time. Each one had my signature. The real one. Loopy, consistent, unmistakably mine. I lined them up in chronological order. It looked like a ledger of all the ways I had loved them. And this court date, would be the last entry. That evening, I got a text from an unknown number. "Mom," I heard. "I'm sorry it's come to this. We need to talk before court. Jeremy." I stared at the screen. The last message he'd sent me before this had been about Thanksgiving plans, a month before the forgery. I didn't reply. What was left to say? That I hoped he wore a good suit? That I'd remember the way he used to fall asleep on my chest when he was 3? No. That part of the story was over. I shut off my phone and made a list. Outfit for court. Clean navy blouse, gray slacks. Folder with all my copies, labeled, tabbed. Spare reading glasses. Snack, in case it ran long. Tissues. Not for crying, but for politeness. When I lay down that night, I didn't sleep easily. But I did sleep. Because there was nothing left to prepare. Nothing left to give. Only the truth now. Let them stand in front of a judge and hear it from someone who had once given them everything. Let them realize they hadn't just stolen money. They'd tried to erase me, but I was still here, and I had a voice. The courthouse was colder than I expected, not just in temperature, though the air conditioning was far too strong for September, but in mood. Everything echoed. Shoes on linoleum, murmurs in hallways, the occasional cough behind a closed door. It wasn't dramatic, not like in the movies. It was quiet, bureaucratic, stern. Walter met me outside the courtroom, briefcase in hand, calm as ever. He gave me a nod instead of a smile. I appreciated that. Inside, the room was nearly empty. No jury. This was a civil hearing. Just a judge, a clerk, a court reporter, and the other side. Jeremy sat 2 tables away, eyes fixed on the documents in front of him, like they might change if he stared long enough. He didn't look at me. Candace was beside him, perfectly still, her hair pulled back tight, lips pressed into a line. She wore a pale blue blazer, like she was trying to look soft. I wondered if she'd practiced her expression in the mirror that morning. I didn't sit until Walter motioned me to. The table felt too large. My hands, resting on the folder, felt small but steady. The judge entered. We stood, then sat. And just like that, it began. Walter opened with precision. He didn't raise his voice or dramatize. He laid it out like a ledger. Margaret Ames, 74, resident of this county, had a retirement account with Capital Trust. On August 18th, without her knowledge or consent, a withdrawal of $42,000 was processed using a forged signature executed by her daughter-in-law, Candace Ames, acting without lawful authority. He said it clearly, calmly, no emotion. But every word struck like a bell. He presented the evidence. The forensic signature analysis, the bank's internal report, the security footage, the teller's sworn statement. Each item entered into the record with quiet clicks of the clerk's keyboard. Then it was my turn. Walter stood beside me. Please state your name. Margaret Ames. Mrs. Ames, do you recognize this signature? He handed me the form. I looked at it. No, I said. It isn't mine. And to confirm, you did not authorize your son or his wife to make any withdrawals from this account? I did not. And when you learned about the withdrawal, what was your reaction? I paused. My voice was steady, but I knew the weight of this answer. I felt erased, I said, like someone decided I didn't matter enough to ask. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just said it. And the silence after was louder than anything I could have screamed. The defense attorney, some young man in a shiny suit who kept checking his notes, asked his questions next. Polite, but thinly veiled. Mrs. Ames, isn't it true that you granted power of attorney to your son? I did. And that such a designation legally allows him to act on your behalf? If I'm incapacitated or have given permission, I was neither. He tried to suggest maybe I'd forgotten a conversation, that I'd perhaps given a verbal okay. I met his eyes and said, if I ever gave permission to empty my retirement account, I'd have written it down. I don't forget where I put $40,000. He didn't ask much after that. Jeremy never took the stand. Candace did, briefly. She said she thought she was helping, said she assumed I would have approved, said the money was going toward a joint opportunity that would have benefited the whole family. I didn't flinch, because none of that was true, and because I had the truth on paper. By noon, the judge had heard enough. She didn't shout. She didn't pound her gavel. She just looked up from her notes and said, the motion to freeze all joint and individual assets belonging to Mr. and Mrs. Ames is granted, pending further review. The matter of forgery and financial misconduct will be referred to the district attorney for potential prosecution. Jeremy's shoulders sagged. Candace's lips parted just slightly. Not to speak, but like she'd forgotten how to breathe. I stood when Walter did, gathered my papers, buttoned my coat. No one looked at me as I walked out. And that was fine. I didn't need their eyes. I had my dignity, and it was louder than any apology they were too afraid to give. The silence after court was almost worse than the betrayal. It wasn't the kind that brings peace. It was hollow. careful, like everyone was waiting to see who would speak first. But I didn't wait. I went home, changed into my house clothes, and made myself a bowl of soup. Lentils and carrots. The kind of thing you make when you want warmth but not comfort. There's a difference. Comfort is for those who want to forget. Warmth is for those who remember but keep living anyway. I didn't hear from Jeremy that evening, not directly. But the next morning, there was a letter in my mailbox. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. He'd used the same slanted script since high school. I opened it slowly, standing at the counter. Mom, I don't know what to say except I'm sorry it's come to this. I never meant for things to go so far. Candace thought we were doing what was best for everyone. I should have stepped in. I should have told you sooner. I didn't want to hurt you. If there's any chance we can fix this before it becomes criminal, please, call me. Love, Jeremy. I read it twice. He still didn't say what he did. Still didn't take ownership. Candace thought. I should have. It's come to this. Passive verbs, no subject, no I forged, no I lied. Just soft language, like you might use when explaining a spilled drink. I folded the letter and placed it in the file with the rest of the evidence. Not because it mattered legally, but because I wanted to remember. I wanted a full record of how far someone could twist their guilt without ever calling it by name. Later that day, Walter called. The DA's office has assigned an investigator, he said. They'll review everything. Might want to speak with you in person. You okay with that? Of course, I said. They've already interviewed the bank clerk. The footage, the signature analysis, it's all been reviewed. And they're leaning toward filing charges. It'll take time, but they're not brushing this off. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. Thank you. He hesitated. I know this isn't easy. It's not supposed to be, I said. If it were easy, it wouldn't mean anything. That evening, the phone rang again. I recognized the number this time. It was their landline, probably Candace. I let it ring. The machine picked up. Margaret, it's Candace. I know you're angry. I know things got out of hand. But Jeremy's under a lot of pressure. And we were only trying to... Well, look, I'm just saying we should all sit down like adults. Talk. Work this out privately, before lawyers make it worse for everyone. Click. It wasn't anger I felt. It was something quieter, like pity, but not quite. Like watching someone knock on a locked door that used to be open, before they stole the key. I didn't call back. I didn't write. The next day, I changed my will. I went to the same law office Howard and I used after his diagnosis. The receptionist remembered me, asked how my garden was doing. I smiled and said, coming back to life. Walter met me in a smaller conference room this time. No long table, just 2 chairs, a desk, and a fresh packet of documents. I've prepared the revised estate plan, he said. You've removed both Jeremy and Candace as beneficiaries. Confirmed? Confirmed. You're designating Claire Ames, your granddaughter, as the sole heir? Yes, but not now. She's too young. I want everything held in trust until she's 30. He looked up. That's 15 years. I want her to become her own person first. Make her own choices. I won't let my money be used as bait. Walter made the changes, then slid the papers across the table. I signed each one carefully, intentionally. My name, in the same handwriting I'd used since I was 15, the one Candace had tried to mimic. When we were done, I stood to leave. Anything else? He asked. Yes, I said. I want a formal statement sent to Jeremy. I'm revoking the power of attorney, effective immediately. Walter nodded. Already prepared. He handed me the copy. I held it for a moment, then tucked it into my bag. Outside, the air felt crisper than it had in weeks. The trees were just starting to turn, early reds along the tips, a reminder that change doesn't ask permission, it just comes. I walked to my car with steady steps. I had no more doubts. They had written me off, but I had written them out. Claire answered the door in her mismatched socks, hair up in a lazy bun, pencil tucked behind her ear. She grinned when she saw me, and for a moment it was like nothing in the world had changed. "Grandma," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled of soap and cinnamon. I hadn't told her I was coming. I didn't need to. She was always glad to see me. And I needed to see her. Not because of legal matters or court dates, but because I wanted to remember what wasn't broken. Her apartment was small, student-sized, with books stacked in uneven piles and a half-finished sketch taped to the wall. I looked at it, a charcoal drawing of hands reaching toward each other. "That yours?" I asked. She nodded. "For class. We're doing gesture studies." I nodded back, slow and approving. "It's good." She smiled and poured us both a cup of herbal tea. Chamomile, the kind she knew I liked. We sat on the floor, her only table was piled high with art supplies, and she asked about the garden, the cat that wasn't mine, but visited every morning, the neighbor who still played the same Glenn Miller record on Sundays. She didn't ask about the court. Not once. That, more than anything, told me she understood. Not the details, maybe, but the shape of it, the gravity, the betrayal. At one point, she leaned back and said, "You look different." "Older?" I offered. "No," she laughed. "Clearer, like you let go of something heavy." I didn't reply, but I reached for her hand and gave it a squeeze. There was a silence between us. Not awkward, just full. And then she said, "I heard them arguing a couple weeks ago. My parents. I didn't hear everything, but I caught your name." I didn't flinch. "What did they say?" "Something about damage control, about how this could ruin everything." I took a slow sip of tea. "They're right." She watched me closely. "Do you hate them?" "No," I said. "But I don't protect them anymore." Claire nodded. "I'm sorry, Grandma." "Don't be. You didn't do this." She looked down, fiddling with the edge of her sock. "I always wondered why we stopped coming to your house." "Because they wanted to own something they didn't build," I said. "And when I wouldn't give it, they stayed away." She nodded again, slower this time. "I missed your lemon cake," she said with a crooked smile. I laughed. "I'll make you one." "You still like the burnt edges?" "They're the best part." We talked a while longer, about her classes, her roommate, a book she wanted to lend me. I listened. I watched her hands move when she got excited. I watched the way her eyes lit up when she forgot to be guarded. When I left, I hugged her tighter than usual. "I'm proud of you," I said. "For what?" "For not becoming them." She held me longer after that. Back home, the house felt less empty. Not because anyone was waiting, but because I finally was. Waiting for spring. For healing. For something new to take root in the space where resentment used to sit. I sat in my chair by the window, opened my notebook, and added one last line beneath all the dates, all the losses, all the signatures. Claire knows it was enough. The letter from the district attorney arrived on a Tuesday. Cream envelope, official seal, typewritten heading. I didn't open it right away. I placed it on the table next to the sugar jar and let it sit there, untouched, while I made myself a sandwich. Turkey on rye, pickles on the side. It wasn't avoidance, it was ritual. I wanted to meet it on my terms. When I finally opened it, the message was simple. The state has determined there is sufficient evidence to pursue criminal charges of financial fraud and forgery against Jeremy Ames and Candace Ames. A formal arraignment date will follow. No flourish, no apology, just the plain fact of consequence. I sat back in my chair, hands flat against the table. I wasn't angry. I wasn't triumphant. I was quiet. And they, Jeremy and Candace, would no longer be able to hide behind silence. Not behind my last name, not behind Sunday calls or Christmas cards signed with hollow words. The next day, Walter called to confirm it verbally. "It's official now," he said. "They'll receive formal notice within 48 hours. There will be a hearing, and from there, it's up to the DA whether they seek a plea or push for trial." "Will I have to testify?" I asked. "Likely. At least once." I nodded. "Then I'll be there." He hesitated. "They'll try to reach you before the court does." "They already have. More will come. Guilt is louder when it knows it's been heard." He was right. That evening, just past 6, the doorbell rang. I opened it slowly. Jeremy stood there, alone. He looked older than last time, paler. His shirt was wrinkled, like he'd pulled it from a pile of laundry. His hands were empty, but his face held something between panic and pleading. "Mom," he said, "can we talk?" I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "No lawyers," he added quickly. "No posturing, just us." I didn't say yes, but I didn't walk away. He rubbed his eyes, took a shaky breath. "They're saying I could go to jail. That Candace could too." "You could," I said. "You did something criminal. I didn't forge the signature, but you allowed it. You knew she was going to the bank." He didn't deny it this time. "I thought it'd be fixed before you ever noticed. I thought I'd replace it." "You thought I wouldn't fight." He looked down. "I didn't think you'd destroy your own son." I took a slow step forward. "No," I said. "I'm saving the woman who raised you." He blinked. "All my life," I continued, "I've taught you to be careful with names. I signed school slips, permission forms, checks, contracts, all with one rule. Your name matters. And now you know why." He opened his mouth, then closed it. "I don't hate you, Jeremy," I said. "But I won't cover for you, not now. Not when you looked at everything I'd built, the years, the savings, the care, and decided you could just take." His voice cracked. "I thought I'd have more time. You've had 42 years of time." He wiped his face with his sleeve like a boy again. "Claire's going to find out. She already has." He flinched. "I've changed my will. Removed you both. The house, the accounts, everything goes into trust for Claire." He looked stunned. "You did that without talking to me?" "No, Jeremy. You did this without talking to me. I'm just following through." He didn't argue after that. When he left, he didn't slam the gate. He didn't even look back. Just walked to his car like a man leaving behind something that used to be his, but never really was. Inside, I sat with the DA's letter again, read it once more. The paper was smooth. Final. Outside, the porch light flicked on. I didn't feel vengeance. I felt free. I spent the next week cleaning the house. Not the frantic kind of cleaning you do when guests are coming. This was different. Slower. Deliberate. A reclaiming. I opened drawers I hadn't touched in years. I emptied boxes filled with papers Howard had kept just in case. I found receipts from our first furniture store, yellowed and curled. Manuals for appliances we no longer owned. Old birthday cards from people long dead. I kept only the ones written in Claire's handwriting. The attic was hardest. Dust thick as felt on everything. I pulled down a suitcase I hadn't opened since our trip to Oregon in '92. Inside, 2 sweaters, a map with Howard's notes scribbled in the margins, and a small envelope with his writing. It said, "In case you ever need to start over." I opened it slowly. A single key. No note, just the key. I held it in my palm for a long time, trying to remember what it opened. A storage locker? An old file cabinet? A shed we no longer had? Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe he'd meant it as a gesture. A message I wasn't ready to read until now. By Friday, the closets were neat, the pantry labeled, the papers organized. It wasn't about preparing for death. It was about being able to see myself in my own home again, without the noise of what they'd done hanging over every room. Walter called again. "The arraignment is confirmed for next week," he said. "They'll enter a plea. If it's not guilty, we proceed to pretrial. And if it is, then sentencing, restitution, probation, possibly jail time. Depends on the DA." I didn't ask what he hoped for. I already knew what I wanted. Not punishment, just recognition. I wanted someone to say aloud, in front of a judge, this woman was right to protect herself. Later that day, I took a walk through the neighborhood. First time in weeks. The leaves were turning for real now. Deep orange, rust, that dry kind of red that only appears in September's last breath. A breeze lifted the corners of my coat. I let it. At the corner, I ran into Mrs. Granger. "You're out," she said, smiling. "You've been missed." "Just needed some quiet," I said. "Your son came by," she added. "A week ago. Seemed tense." I nodded. "He's learning about boundaries." She didn't pry, just placed a gentle hand on my arm. "You still make the best roses on the street," she said, "even when you disappear." I walked the rest of the way home with my head high. Not proud, just rooted. That night I wrote a letter to Claire, not for now, but for the future. For when she turned 30 and the trust would open. "My sweet girl, if you're reading this, then you've come into a legacy you didn't ask for. I hope you'll use it with care. Not just the money, but the story that comes with it. This isn't just an inheritance. It's a reminder that silence isn't noble, that you are allowed to protect yourself, that you can be kind without being soft, and forgiving without being blind. If anyone ever makes you feel small, remember who gave you this, and remember that you carry my name not in blood, but in strength." I signed it and sealed it in an envelope marked, "To be opened at 30. Then I placed it inside the safe, next to my new will. The next morning, I made lemon cake. The old way, zest first, sugar rubbed into the peel, egg whites folded in last. I burned the edges on purpose. Claire always liked them best. I sat at the table while it cooled and looked around the kitchen. It felt honest again, not like a crime scene, not like a battleground, just a place where a woman had lived a long life and was still living it. The phone rang. I didn't answer. Let the machine catch it. Walter's voice came through. "They've entered a guilty plea. Restitution will be ordered. No trial." That was it. No grand finish, no applause. I sat still for a long moment, then got up, cut myself a corner slice, and sat by the window. The world hadn't changed, but I had. If you're reading this and you've ever felt erased, used, or quietly dismissed, don't wait for someone else to name it. Say it yourself. Write it down. Stand up. Not with rage, but with clarity. And if this story means something to you, share it. Somewhere, someone needs to know they're not the only one. The morning after Walter called, I opened the windows. All of them. Even the one in the guest room that sticks if you don't lift it just right. The breeze moved through the house like a cleansing, not dramatic, not scented with triumph. Just honest air moving through honest rooms. The restitution paperwork arrived a few days later. Jeremy had signed. So had Candace. The full amount, $42,000 i.e. to be returned in monthly payments, plus court fees. The DA agreed to probation, no jail. That was fine by me. I wasn't after bars. I was after acknowledgement. A check came 2 weeks later. The first one. A quiet envelope with my name typed neatly in the center. No note, no apology, just a number and a signature. I placed it in a new file marked repayment, not because I needed the money anymore, but because I wanted a record. A line of proof that said, "You thought I wouldn't fight." But I did. The neighborhood moved on. No one spoke openly of what had happened, but I saw the change. People knocked more gently. Mrs. Granger brought over muffins she said were just because. Even the Simmons boy started waving when he rode past on his bike. I wasn't a mystery anymore. I was a story, and somehow I was still standing. Claire visited the next weekend. She brought flowers, not store-bought, wild ones, bundled in brown paper, tied with twine. "You okay?" she asked, stepping into the hallway like she belonged there again. "I am," I said. "Better than I've been in years." We sat in the garden. The lemon tree was blooming again. Late for the season, but persistent. She helped me prune the lower branches. I told her about the trust. Not the numbers, just the purpose. "It's not about inheritance," I said. "It's about remembering where you come from and what you're allowed to say no to." She nodded. She understood more than I had at her age. Before she left, she handed me a folded piece of paper. "It's from my sketchbook," she said. "I wanted you to have it." It was a drawing. Me, in the window, back turned, holding a cup of tea. Nothing detailed. Just soft lines, calm posture, the hint of breeze in the curtain. "You didn't draw my face," I said. "No," she smiled. "Didn't need to." After she left, I sat with that drawing in my lap and thought about the woman I used to be. The one who let things slide, who avoided conflict, who mistook silence for strength. That woman served me well once, but she's gone now. Now I keep my doors locked and my voice steady. I trust, but I verify. And I love, but with open eyes. I still make lemon cake. I still talk to Howard sometimes when the house is very quiet. I still write down everything, just in case. I'm not lonely. I'm not bitter. I'm something better. I'm mine again.